G'day and welcome back to yet another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups. We are almost fully assembled with a 1275. In this episode, we're going to get this thing back together and in the car, get it running, take it for a lap around the block. But before we do, let's roll the intro. All right, so the engine is just about ready to go back together. We've got a couple more things we need to do before we finish it off. So the first thing we need to do is put new side cover gaskets on there. So we're going to do that first. I've just replaced the two longer studs at the top of the rocker shaft, simply because the old longer studs, which are on the outside, which is what secures the rocker cover to the cylinder head, the nuts had started to strip. So I decided, well, let's just get new nuts, let's get new longer bolts, and then fit them. Now, the inner bolts are shorter than the outers, so make sure if you're ever reassembling these, the longer ones go on the outside. So one goes on the crankshaft side, the other one goes on the flywheel side. Once we put the covers and cases back on, we'll just clean everything up. We're going to give it a full degrease, finish putting the side diff seals in, tighten up all the bolts, and then we can reassemble it. Now, I'm not going to show you exactly how I reassembled it or reinstall it inside the car. I'm just going to do a time lapse simply because I've done it many times before, and I've shown you guys how to do it. So once you've removed an engine from a car, whether it be a Toyota Corolla, whether it be a Subaru BRZ, whether it be a Maserati, whatever the case may be, whenever you're removing an engine, it is generally the same sort of principle. So as I've said before, start at the top of the engine, work your way down, drain all the fluids, disconnect absolutely everything, and eventually out she'll come. So it's not overly hard, so that's why I did a time lapse. And I do apologize if you wanted to see this in depth. I will be doing more engine reinstallations and removals in the future, so that will be more content coming up. But I hope you guys enjoy the nice little snippet video that I've got going on just down here. So once it's in, we're pretty much just going to start reattaching everything. We do have an exhaust in which Kyle has dropped off. Now, I thought this was a full exhaust system. I thought it was going to be something from the manifold all the way back. Turns out it is just the rear muffler. So on this particular one, he actually got this from a guy who owns, should I say, a Mini Ute, like an actual Mini Ute, not one that's been fabricated like Kyle's. And it's pretty much a muffler with two side pipes. Now, they don't come out on the side of the vehicle, but I think just behind each of the rear wheels. So that's going to be really interesting to be able to get fitted, simply because I'm probably going to have to fab up some brackets and get someone around to give me a hand. I've got a couple of mates who do this sort of stuff, so it'd be really nice to get them involved in the channel and, you know, get some exposure for their business as well. There's a couple other things we need to do. The engine steady bar as well, where it joins to the firewall. Somehow the bolt had seized in there, so I had to actually cut it out. We've got a new bolt for it, so I've got new bushers for the steady bar. We need to bleed the clutch, we need to bleed the brakes, we need to finish inspecting the brakes and reassemble the entire thing, really. We're going to give it a quick once over in the engine bay before I put it all back together. It is a really good idea that if you do have an engine out and you do need to touch something up, you do need to paint something, you want to fix your wiring while the engine's out, it is the easiest time to do it, guys. So if you want to do it or you're thinking about doing it, I would definitely recommend removing at least the engine assembly and then tidying everything up. You can do it when it's in the car, but as you know, once you start putting brake boosters in, you've got an intercooler, you've got oil coolers, you're running extra stuff. There's not a lot of available real estate inside the engine bay itself, especially on a Mini. So it is certainly advised, if you want to clean this stuff up, do it while it's out of the car, and then they give you more access. So let's get back to it. Let's finish putting this thing back together, get it running. Also, I forgot to mention that I did a vernier style timing chain setup on this thing. Now, I've spoken about the importance of using a dial gauge indicator when dialing in a cam. Now, you also do need to use the cam dial gauge wheel. Give me 1 second, I'll try and find it. This wheel is a specific tool designed to dial in the camshaft. Now, you're probably wondering, why do you need to dial in a camshaft? Well, simply because you want to be able to obtain the maximum benefit of the camshaft that you're fitting. Now, if you are doing a standard build, you are just refurbishing it, you probably just want to put it together, do the dot to dot on the timing chain that is, and then send it. Do your tappet adjustments, done, see you later. So when you install a camshaft that has a different profile compared to standard, you really want to be using this tool to be able to dial it in 100%. That's going to allow maximum performance from that camshaft. Now, in saying that, there are three vital components of the engine working in unison, and if one of those components isn't timed correctly or set correctly, you're not going to be able to maintain or achieve that maximum threshold in which the engine's capable of doing. So we have things like ignition timing, we have the camshaft timing, and we have the carburetor. When all three things are working in unison, perfect. If one of those things is out, for instance, you've got a dodgy carburetor, you've done everything else smick, you're probably just going to get the carby running well enough to be able to drive the car. Now, it might be okay, it might drive well, it might be, you know, flat spot at 3/4 throttle, or at idle, it's up and down, but dialing in the camshaft is certainly a must, and I cannot stress this enough. It is something that does take a lot of time, patience, and knowledge to be able to do, which you have seen in a previous video listed above as well. So this timing case is an absolute godsend, because you literally just undo the front, adjust it, time it, done, see you later. The only downside is you obviously have to remove the cylinder head to be able to find out where top dead center is of the piston, and then top dead center of number 1 inlet cam lobe. So it is a bit of mucking around, but I would certainly recommend, if you are going to be doing this sort of thing, put a vernier style timing chain on there. That way it's going to allow maximum advance or retard of the camshaft, so you can dial it in 100%, get it on point. That way when you reassemble everything, you can put all back together knowing that the engine is going to almost fire first go. Not only that, but it is also going to allow maximum performance once you've got the vehicle tuned. Now also remember that when you finish doing cam timing, you do need to reset the valve clearances as well. With this 266 cam, they do state there needs to be at 16 thou, I believe, from memory. It might be 12 or 16. Whichever one it is, I will be setting the valve timing to, just to ensure that we get maximum lift out of it. Generally, if they give you two different measurements, so it might say minimum 12 thou, maximum 15, I'd probably go the 12 thou. That way it's going to allow extra lift, whereas the 16, it's going to give you a little bit less lift. Not much, but if you just want that extra performance, I would definitely do the lower end of the scale. So let's get back to it and get this thing running on the ground so we can start working on the next project, which, if you guys haven't seen already, you're going to be seeing very, very soon. Alright, just thought I'll quickly interrupt the episode and have a quick talk about the new oil pressure line fitting. So the original one that was on the engine block was an L bracket piece. So it came up, went across, and then attached to the pipe. Now the fitting that we're using is a straight through piece, I guess. Tomo's tech tip here is, whenever you are fitting something to do with oil pressure, even coolant, and it is a sensor, you need to make sure that you use a bit of sealant on the thread. So what I'm actually using here is a bit of Worth pipe sealant. This is a pretty specialty product and isn't generally available to the public, but you can just use thread tape when you're applying these. Now the reason why it's important to make sure that you use thread tape or pipe sealant on a pipe like this is because once it's under pressure, it will work itself out through the threads of the oil pressure switch, the coolant temperature sensor, whatever it is that you're fitting. So quick little tech tip, put a bit of sealant on there. All you need is just a little bit, just run around the edges and then away you go. Now, when you're applying thread tape, you need to go the opposite direction of rotation. That way when you wind it in, it's not all gonna bunch up. So if it's a right end thread, you wanna wrap it the opposite way around there. That way it seals properly. Alright, just thought I would quickly interrupt this episode. So, as you can see, I've got the engine in. Most of the ancillaries are in the vehicle at the moment. It did take me quite some time to wire everything up. Just because it does have an aftermarket harness in here. There is, some brake fluid in here. I'm currently bleeding the brakes. I'm just going to get to that in a second. I'll put the brake booster in. We ended up replacing both the clutch and the brake master cylinders because the older ones were just absolutely crap, and you probably can't see too well there because I don't have my torch. But all the paint is starting to flake off. So a little disappointing, but we do need to get this thing painted at some stage. So we got the carburetor all hooked up. I've got a new throttle cable as well because the old one was just absolutely crap, and when I pushed it through this little hole here, it just didn't go too well. The old Monza style oil cap. I do need to replace the fan. As you can see there, it is all kind of chopped up and really crap here. So actually what happened there is little Tomo's tech tip. I'll just try and get in the light so you can see. Tomo's tech tip, when you're working on cars, you want to make sure that there's no loose items of clothing, loose hair, any loose rags, anything like that. So what actually happened was I was preparing this car for the episode, and I was building up oil pressure, and as I was cranking it, I had the world's biggest rag sitting there right next to the alternator, and of course it sucked it into the fan, which then led to it being sucked into the fan assembly, which then bent the blades and actually destroyed the radiator. So you can kind of see, I'll see if I can show it later. Yeah, there's a couple of gouges taken out there, and I'm really disappointed in myself actually, because I did cause that damage. But being a businessman, even though this is my mate's car, and I do apologise, I do have my fan going, it is quite loud because it is stinking hot in here. It's been raining outside, so a bit of humidity. So yeah, I am disappointed in myself, but in saying that, as a businessman, it is important to make sure that when you do these sort of jobs, whether it be either for yourself even, or a customer or a family member, whoever it is, friend, that you adhere to things like warranty and workmanship. So I stuffed this up and I now need to replace it. So the money that I've earned doing this job, I now need to reinvest that. So it's a really good learning curve, not just for me, but you guys out there, that, you know, if you do make a mistake, it is really important to make sure that you own up to it, but also moving forward that you learn from it as well. So as you can see, pretty much everything's in. We just need to finish doing a couple of things. There's just probably half a dozen things I just need to finish tidying up around here. So when you swap the radiator over the fan, I've got a smaller fan belt. As you can see, there's not a lot of room. I'll try and wedge my finger in between the cross member and the alternator. I can't really do that. Even though it is adjusted, it's all right, but as you can see, the wiring that's down here isn't the best. Some wiring around the coil as well, I do need to redo and just tidy it up. I do have new oil pressure lines. So always make sure that when you start an engine for the first time after rebuilding it, or even just pulling it apart, you have your oil pressure gauge connected. Disconnect the ignition coil and just crank it until the oil pressure on the gauge goes up. Otherwise, you start the engine, you might be without oil for 10, 15, 20 seconds. All right, so quickly, just want to show you something else. I'm sorry that I'm getting off topic. So we're in the middle of cleaning, adjusting the brakes. So as you can see, there is heaps of meat left on those rear shoes. Now, another one of Tomo's tech tips here is, if your wheel studs are able to do this, move in and out, you need new wheel studs. So this wheel bearing's actually got play in it, so we do need to replace it and put new seals in there as well. So that's something that I've also told Kyle about. We can probably do it up for now, but for the meantime, yeah, I'm just gonna have to just put the wheel on and just move it. We'll have to come back to that another day. Also, I did notice as well, I'll just try and grab my torch. This has an adjustable trumpet at the back. As you can see, that nut isn't attached. Sorry, the nut is attached, what am I saying? It is quite rusty, so those have obviously been in there for quite some time. It does look like the cones are in somewhat of good condition, but yeah, I'll definitely be trying to renew those down the track sometime. And if you guys already haven't, make sure to check out the video I did on rubber cone and trumpet selection. This one is Alex Moulton, made by Avalon VMS England. Anyone have any information about Avalon VMS in England? I'd be really interested to know. If you do know, let me know in the comment section below. All right, let's get back onto this thing. Let's get this thing finally started, fired up, running, ready to go out the door. All right, welcome back. It has been quite some time since you guys last saw me. Well, in actual editing world, it's been a couple of seconds. We finally have Iggs running. As you can see, yes, she has a headlight out because I don't have the thermofan wired in as yet. It has taken me forever, literally forever, to get this thing running. There was a lot of things that I didn't film with this, simply because you'd already seen it a lot already in other videos. So essentially, threw the engine in, we put a new radiator in it, new fan, we did rear wheel bearings as well. He does have an exhaust in which he wanted us to fit, but unfortunately it's going to have to be sent to an exhaust shop because I don't have all the tools and equipment to be able to get this thing plumbed in properly, which isn't a problem. So yeah, this thing has just been an absolute pain in the ass. I've been trying to get this thing running for literally 2 weeks now. I've had nothing but issues, but I'll save that for another video. Essentially now she is finished, she's done. She is ready to go back to Kyle. I also did rear wheel bearings on this, which was actually quite interesting, to be honest. Not because rear wheel bearings are super interesting, but it was interesting because the original ones that came out of this at the back weren't a tapered roller bearing like you find a standard replacement. They were a ball bearing type, and there was 2 ball bearing bearings in the back, which was really, really odd. No matter where I looked, no matter who I spoke to, no one had ever heard of this. So given the age of this old girl, I reckon they were probably the original wheel bearings from when it was manufactured in the 60s. So I had to punch them out, had to put in tapered roller bearings, did all that. I actually had to do 2 radiators. Long story short, I damaged the one putting it in, and to save me running the risk that it wasn't going to seal, that it was going to leak and there was going to be problems, I decided, well, you know what, I need to warrant my work. And moving forward, I just thought, well, the best way to do that is just to replace it again. And I did a 4-blade radiator fan as well. The original one, I think, was the 8 or 11 blade, whichever one it was. So yeah, we upgraded that, so it sounds much better, revs a lot freely. Last thing really I have to do is just try and tune it, get this thing running better. It's running pretty good, blows a little bit of smoke, but you know, that's just a timing and carby issue. Being a Weber as well, I'm not overly familiar with them. Like you've seen here on the Morris Minor, they run an SU. SUs are very simple, very basic, so those are the sort of carbies that I generally try and deal with. So tuning it, getting it running right is one thing, but actually tuning it to suit the needle profile in which you need for the vehicle for it to run at its optimum performance, that's generally another thing. So it is a very specialist thing to do. So I will do a video on how to tune a carburetor, hopefully sometime soon. But yeah, we're pretty much ready, we're back together. I've had some startability issues with this thing, and it's just been non-stop headaches. So as you can hear, she's sounding a little bit high in revs. She's probably about, I'll probably guess about 12, maybe 1300 RPM. But I'm keen to take it for a spin. As you can see, I've still got the bonnet off it at the moment. So I just left that off because it is much easier to be able to get it. Oh, and I've got my fan as well going because my wife had to yell at me for stinking out the shed last night, so that was fun. Slept on the couch. Yeah, so I just had the bonnet off because it makes it so much easier, and they're really easy to remove on these old girls. But yeah, that's IGS, that's the build. So long as there's no other issues, which I doubt there is. This is the first time I've actually run it. And yeah, as I said, it's been a good like 2 weeks since I did the last bit of filming to get to where we are. So we did a brake and clutch fluid flush. We did rear wheel bearings. I did a CV boot, greased everything. Did an adjustable Malapassi fuel pressure regulator, which you guys can see. I think the fuel pump that I've got in there at the moment is on its way out because it keeps dropping pressure. So I've got to just double check that. Yeah, a couple little odds and ends just to tie up, but other than that, that's IGS, that's the build. So guys, thanks so much for watching. We are back onto the Morris Minor, and if you guys haven't already seen, and I've released it depending when I release this video, we have some really exciting news for that thing, and we got some really good opportunities ahead of us in regards to what we're going to do to that thing and the performance mods and stuff that we have lined up for it. So guys, if you want to see more content, please consider liking and subscribing, and we'll see you right here on another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups.